Decades ago, the pop writer and singer Beatle John Lennon wrote his signature song, Imagine. And it's sort of a sweet melody, so people sort of hum along and sing along with it, not really reflecting on the words. But the opening line is, imagine there is no heaven, it's easy if you try. That's the first step, and then we could have perfect harmony on earth, everybody loving one another, no poverty, no disease, sort of like regaining the Garden of Eden. Well, nonsense. Habakkuk, the prophet, said, wherever I look, I see violence, I see conflict, I see exploitation, I see despair. And if you take away that vision of hope that comes from the prophets of Israel, that comes from the Messiah of Nazareth, what do you have? Not a world living in harmony, but conflict, violence, and despair with no hope for the future. Now, John Lennon has a little corner of Central Park dedicated to him because he lived right there at 72nd Street in Central Park West. They call it Strawberry Fields, and it's very nice. When I'm giving my tours of New York, I pointed out to people, and you walk in, and they have in stone on the ground the word imagine, and people, as fans, will leave a flower there, a little memento. So what? Imagine there is no heaven, and John Lennon is laying in oblivion. But the revelations from Abraham until today have to do with having a faith in the fact that life has meaning, life has purpose, that suffering isn't the be-all and end-all, that violence and sin and injustice is not the ultimate power in this universe. That is why the apostles said to the Lord, increase our faith in today's gospel passage. Their faith was wobbly, much like ours. Pretty strong when things are going well, and then off balance when we face tragedy, heartbreak, and sorrow, disappointment, and betrayal. Now, they were seeing the mission of Jesus unfolding before their eyes. They'd seen miracles. They were astonished at what Jesus was saying. But also they were humbled and frightened because they were supposed to forgive their enemies. They were supposed to be faithful in marriage. They were supposed to be generous to a fault. Right before they said increase our faith in Luke's gospel is the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. And they heard that. They said, you mean those street people that are destitute, that are smelly, that are dirty, that are sick and diseased, we have to care for them. We have to acknowledge them. We have to love them. And right after that parable ends, they say, increase our faith. Increase our faith. How could we do that? And that has to be our most fundamental prayer in our spiritual journey. Lord, by your grace we do believe. Help that belief deepen, expand, take up more and more of our mind, our imaginations, our hearts, and our souls. Now, our imagination is not big enough to really picture God, the angels and the saints, eternity. Our imagination's not big enough to do that. Our minds are not smart enough or big enough to grasp the essence of God. We know something of God's existence, something of God's presence, something of God's creative power just by looking at the marvelous universe around us. But to really understand God, we're very, very finite creatures trying to understand the infinite. However, Even though our imaginations aren't big enough to imagine God, our minds aren't deep enough and smart enough and big enough to understand God, we've been given a human heart and a human soul that's capable of doing something marvelous, loving God. And if we love God, it has to be on the basis of the faith that we've all been given and want to pass on from one generation to the next generation to the next generation, so that the hell on this earth that Habakkuk spoke about will be held held at a distance, held in check, and the reality of a heaven to come will take over our imaginations, fill our minds, and strengthen our wills on earth to be heroes of love in this all too cowardly world. Now Jesus tells them, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you could do anything. Have almost magical powers. You could suspend the natural laws. Saying, mustard tree, fall into the sea, and it would. And they already had a small faith growing into them, and they were going to be doing something much greater than that. They were going to be transforming this world, giving the world a conscience, a truly human and humane heart. But now in doing it, he wanted to remind them, and they would have many miracles before their lives were done, that at the end of the day, their attitude had to be attributing everything to God. There's a temptation for believers to say, God's awful lucky to have me on God's side. Giving ourselves a pat on the back. Well, I'm pretty great. I don't know how God would get along without me. And the apostles were, of course, jockeying for position in the kingdom of God themselves and being sort of envious and jealous of one another. I'm going to be greater than you. That showed their faith was still infinitesimally small. However, then Jesus gives us this rather harsh dose of reality. The way the real world works. You have a servant. He works 10 hours in the field. You're paying him his wage. He comes in. You say, hey, good job. Sit down. Let me wait on you. And take it easy now. He says, no. The boss will say, feed me. Take care of me. And then later, you can take care of yourself. He said, if that happens in the world of material gain and goods and powers, and the worker doesn't complain, knowing that's his or her lot, so too it should be in the kingdom of God. When we've given everything to God, when we've helped the poor, the needy, the homeless, when we've forgiven those who haven't even sought our forgiveness but who have hurt us badly and betrayed us deeply, when we've done all those things, we say, well, we've just done our duty as believers in the Lord of Nazareth. But the good news is, one day we'll hear those words, well done, my good and faithful servant. Welcome into my kingdom. That kingdom that John Lennon and the likes of him didn't want to imagine, but they could have through an act of faith, even the size of a mustard seed.